Welcome to Happy News Network, the Minisode. We're here to brighten your week while you take a break from doom scrolling. I'm Shayna, and today's guest, Jen Wheeler-Kahn, is a stage manager who created Scenery Bags, a company taking retired scenery and turning it into bags and jewelry. She's also a longtime mentor of mine. Jen, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so awesome. I am a definite doom scroller, so I really appreciate the work that you are doing right now.
Thank you. And I know that, social media is part of everyone's lives, but we're trying to find the optimistic side of it.
Yes, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And it's so good to see you.
You too. Thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this.
I'm so glad we could make time to make this happen. I know you're very busy with Scenery Bags.
Well, I mean, I'm mostly busy with my two little boys. I have almost 2-year-old, almost 4-year-old that take up the majority of my time. And then whatever I have left over is Scenery Bags. And then into like the wee hours, I kind of do nap time. And then after everybody goes to sleep are my little pockets.
Some around the clock work.
Yeah.
Much. Well, where did the idea of Scenery Bags come from and how did it all get started?
Well, it's so like the Genesis story goes back way before Scenery Bags actually started. I was a stage manager for 17 years, which is how we met. And then along with stage managing for 4 years of that, I was a blogger with my sister back when like blogs were a thing. And we did give back in ethical style. So these are like the two halves of me that I never thought would meet. There was like my stage management theater side, and then there was this like eco-friendly give back fashion side. And that was kind of like my outlet for being like backstage all the time and only Black. And then the summer of 2015, I was on a road trip with one of my girlfriends and we were just brainstorming ideas because we were driving up the coast to Maine and there were all these great like upcycled companies that we found. And we're like, we could do this. Where's our idea? And this idea of upcycling theatrical backdrops came up and we're like, that I could do that. That's doable. Like I know that most of them get thrown away, sadly. And it's a large piece of cloth that we can cut and wash and sew into something else. And so the idea started with just backdrops and turning them into bags. And I kind of kicked that idea down the road for 2 years. And then I had Hudson, my first son, which afforded me time at home. Even though like being a mother is the hardest thing that I've ever done, it also gave me, I was home for the first time ever. Because, when you stage manage, you're never home except to sleep. And that's about it. And so I launched Scenery Bags and it kind of took off a lot faster than I thought it would, which was really exciting and turned from this like cute little side project I was going to do while I was like on my maternity leave into my full-time company. And then in the last couple of years, I started getting people emailing me saying like, hey, I have this that was on this Broadway tour. I have this that was in this Broadway show. One of which being stage decks, the show decks, the stage floor, which are made out of EPG, which is a super hard laminate that doesn't really decompose. And so I was like, yeah, that eco footprint is terrible. Let's see if we can do something to upcycle that. And so that's where our jewelry line was born. And I have our little show deck bangle on. So I basically just don't say no. And when people are like, hey, I have trash, do you want it? And I say yes. And then I figure out how to use it on the back end.
And I love that. Yeah. There's this great thing about saying yes and knowing that you're going to figure out a solution. And sometimes you can let it marinate for a little bit.
Yes. And I'm very, very lucky that I have 2 manufacturers now, one in Florida and one in South Carolina, both. So everything is made in America. But Florida makes our bags and our jewelry is made at TTS Studios, which is actually an IATSE scene shop that makes our jewelry. So it's like a union scene shop that makes these sets and then also converts the retired ones into into jewelry for us. And then, I also should mention that there's a give back component because like accessibility to theater has always been really important to me. And I feel like we're losing a younger generation just because it's not introduced in a young age. It's not introduced very much in schools anymore. And so, trying to make sure that a younger generation knows theater exists and knows to look for it because, the theater has a reputation of being kind of classist and really expensive. And of course, some things are, but they're also, I know a lot of theaters are doing really great work trying to have like lower discounted prices for especially younger patrons. And you can go see a theatrical performance for the same price as like an IMAX movie. And so it's just about knowing to look for it. So a portion of every purchase goes to a nonprofit in New York called TDF that introduces students to theater.
I love that. And I noticed on the Scenery Bags website, it looks like you've sent 875 kids to Broadway shows.
We've actually just passed 1,000. So I need to update my graphics.
That's so cool.
Yeah. It's turned into so much more than I ever could have imagined. It's like, it's the gift that keeps giving back in like every direction. It's
I love that you're giving back to the community itself by not only recycling scenery back into the arms and homes of people who love theater and want to see that scenery have a second life. You're also recycling back into the community by letting younger people bring theater into their lives.
Exactly. Yeah. I love like this cyclical nature of everything that we're doing and how all of it tells a story and all the things. I mean, you work in storytelling for long enough that it just like it's like bleeds into every other facet of your life. Like everything needs to have like a cohesive through line. And so I love that part of it too.
Yeah. And I know that you've sent so many kids to shows. I have to ask, what was your first Broadway show that you got to see?
My first Broadway show that I got to see was we went on a big trip for my 17th birthday and we saw a bunch of shows. And my first Broadway show was the original cast of Ragtime with Brian Stokes Mitchell and Audra McDonald. And it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my whole life. So not only did I get to see Ragtime on Broadway with the original cast, but it was my first Broadway show. So it's magical forever.
That is such a great first Broadway experience. And I can only imagine like being 17, that's one of your first big trips to the city. You get to see so many other shows. That's just such a standout, especially all these years later, you've worked in the industry and you've probably crossed paths with some of that cast.
I crossed paths with a lot of that cast actually, which is incredible also. But I mean, to this day, it's one of my favorite Broadway musicals because of that, but also I think it would be anyway, because the score is just so amazing. But yeah, it was a pretty perfect first Broadway show.
So on a businessy sort of note, what was that transition from stage manager to CEO like? Because stage managers are organizational, communicative figures, but they're not really de facto, they're not in charge the way a producer or a GM is. So what was that transition like and how do you balance all of that plus mom?
It's a really good question. And I'm not exactly sure I know the answer even like 4 years in, but Brandon, my husband was a stage manager as well. And we always joke that if you're a good stage manager, you can do anything because the skill set transfers to like pretty much everything. It's just like being a good manager of things, time, people. And so I've used every bit of knowledge I learned as a stage manager to do Scenery Bags. I'm so grateful for my background in stage management and Excel spreadsheets and time management and all the things, because it's really just about like keeping plates spinning for me, like knowing things are happening and trying to like check in on this and check in on that and check in on this and remember the timeline of things. But the transition, I mean, it was such a huge departure of my previous life before children and Scenery Bags that it just was, I really like rebuilding myself in so many ways, taking everything that I learned in like version 1 of Jen into version 2 or whatever version we're on now, because the transition from like the transition of being a new mother is earth shattering. Like it is really like such a huge transition. Everything becomes about this little human you created, and your schedule is out the window, and what you used to do is out the window, and what you used to look like is out the window. Like everything is new. And I think that's why so many new moms start new companies, because it's like, I just reinvented myself, and it kind of takes the fear of it away. You're like, well, I don't know who I am anymore, so I'm going to invent something. I'm going to start telling this new version of this story. And so it kind of felt like this weirdly perfect time, even though it was really hard to do with a brand new baby at my hip the whole time. But yeah, the transition was, it just kind of like fell into place because you just had to keep things going. You had to keep this new infant alive. You had to keep this new company going. Yeah. Also, I would say that the two things that pushed me to keep going were the give back component, because it wasn't about, if it were only about me being successful as a businesswoman, I don't think I would have pushed myself as hard, because if it was only going to affect me, it's kind of like, oh, I can let that slide, or we can do that next week, or, you know, this will be a smaller thing. But because everything I did had an immediate result and effect on TDF and their community, I pushed myself so much harder, because if my donation that I was sending them at the end of the month was low, I felt bad. I felt like I hadn't fulfilled my role in that partnership to support the amazing work that they are doing. And so that has been such a huge instigator in having me work harder for this. And then also the fact that we went like viral in our first month, and I had like 5,000 pre-orders to fulfill. And so like all of a sudden you have to figure it out. Like this became like a big company overnight. And we really like, I hired a lawyer. I hired 2 lawyers. I hired an accountant. You know, like you get yourself to where you can because you care the most. And then once you realize like, okay, this is bigger than I can handle, because you care the most, you hire the right people to like make it happen and make it happen the right way. So I don't know, it was just like Mr. Magooing my way through, and thankfully the right people showed up at the right time to help me.
I think it's this combination, it sounds, of saying yes to new things and wanting new things, but also the idea of selflessness and adding in the idea that you're accountable to help other people, both as a mom, as a person giving back to the theatrical community that you're part of in many professional capacities. So there's this sort of duality of accountability and saying yes to the change factor.
Very true. Very, very true. Yeah. And those two are like big motivating components for me personally. So all of that worked out really well.
Yeah. I imagine if they're part of your active life, it's easier to put them into the day-to-day scope of what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And what advice do you have for others who want to make their unique ideas a reality, especially while, you know, so many people are sitting at home with their own ideas right now? What kind of advice do you have for them?
Oh, just do it. Just jump.
Yeah.
I mean, I always say, and I touched on this a little bit previously, but when you're starting out, if you have a new idea that you really believe in and you are so passionate about and you just can't like put it to rest, then go for it. Make the jump, make the product, keep asking, ask the right people to help you, seek wise counsel on all of those things, and they'll lead. Like that's how I started. You just kind of like each new person points you in a new direction. And you will feel unqualified. You know, I have a background in stage management. I do not have a background in retail or manufacturing or marketing or any of the things that I'm doing now on a daily basis. Purse design, you know, like none of these things have anything to do with what I studied, but I care the most. And my passion qualifies me. My passion gives me a seat at the table. And so I always say your passion qualifies you. If you care the most, you will shepherd this idea to its creation and onward for as long as you want to be a part of its guiding. And yeah, so you just have to jump and know that it's going to be hard and find the right people to help you. And then I also read this other thing that I thought was really interesting. So I'll share it because I am very bad at, I have an idea and I tell every single person I run into, I'm like, oh, and I'm working on this new idea. And then I read this thing that said, be careful about who you share your new ideas with. And not in a proprietary way that like someone's going to steal it, but in a way that when you tell someone this new idea, you get feedback that's like, oh, that's so great. And so in a way, it like checks a box, like you feel accomplishment, even though you haven't done it yet. And if you do that often enough, you are filled in a way, like you are gratified, even though you haven't done it because of the feedback you're getting from people. And it will slow your resolve in actually doing the thing. And so I thought that was really interesting. So I've always kind of hung on to that advice that, you know, share with enough people that you will help you get the thing accomplished, but don't share so much that you feel like you're already getting the accolades that you wanted for creating the thing, and which lead you not to actually do it. If that makes any sense.
That is some sage counsel, especially in the era of where we show and we showcase and use social media. That's kind of helpful, especially if we're sharing people who have accomplishments, making sure they're accomplishments instead of just the idea of the accomplishment, really encouraging what the process has led to.
Exactly. Because it's so easy to just be like, oh, everyone thought I was so smart. Okay, moving on to the next thing. And then you never do that thing that was a really good idea that everyone loved.
If I had $1, yeah, it's a very relatable thing.
I do that too all the time.
Yeah. And how many times do we say, oh, I was thinking of watching this movie, and then we never actually watch it? It's even if it's not a business idea, we still do it all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a little like put your money where your mouth is kind of advice. But I needed it when I read it at the time. I was like, oh, that's a very good reminder to like be accountable for the things that you say and seek wise counsel and not accolades.
I love that advice, and I hope other people do too. Well, Jen, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And if people want to learn more about Scenery Bags, they can go to scenerybags.com or visit the Instagram page at Scenery Bags.
That's right.
Well, from all of us here at Happy News Network, I'm Shayna. Have a happy day.